Hello, everyone. Welcome to Café Muse. Thank you, Michael Davis, for the lovely music. I'm Ellen Cole, and I'm hosting tonight along with our series founder, Karen Alanier. Our technical guru, Henry Crawford, is behind the scenes. Tonight, we have a very special programming showcasing the winners of the 2023 Jacklyn Potter Young Poets Competition. Karen will give you a brief overview of the competition and then turn the spotlight over to Kathy Haley, director of the Jacklyn Potter Young Poets Competition. Kathy will introduce poet Evan Wang, and the two runners-up, Seong Kim and Richard Scott, who's been a little delayed, so we're hoping he'll make it. They'll each read some of their poems. After that, you'll hear from our featured poet, Claire McGoff. We encourage you to buy Claire's book tonight and also to donate to Café Muse to support our literary programs. The links for buying her book and for making a donation will be in the chat. Audience members have been muted to help us prevent feedback problems and have minimum interruptions. During the reading, please use the chat if you want to comment or ask questions that our readers may answer during the Q&A period, moderated by Karen Alanier if time permits. Our program is scheduled for 1 hour. Be sure to mark your calendar for our next Café Muse meeting on Monday, July 11, featuring poets Luther Jett and Indran Amirthanayagam. And now, here's Karen Alanier to introduce you to the annual Jacklyn Potter Young Poets Competition.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for that wonderful and informative introduction to this series. And it's an exciting night for poetry because we have brought the young poets to the Café Muse Forum. In 1988, I designed the Young Poets Competition and enlisted the poet Gail Ranadivi to create the first program, which she did as part of her American University MFA curriculum. I don't know if you knew that, David, but I see you out there in the audience, and this program had its start there. For 34 years, WordWorks presented our young poet winners in the Joaquin Miller Poetry Series. Others who ran the program in its first 15 years included such poets as Maxine Clare, Elaine Magarel, Mary Quattlebaum, and Perry Epps. In 2006, when Jacklyn passed, WordWorks honored her for the loving care she took with the young poets, both in our programs and in her teaching career, by putting her name on this competition. More recently, Julian Berman, our 2019 winner, ran several years of the competition. Julian won the competition as a freshman and then ran the contest through his sophomore, junior, and senior years of high school. He was amazing. Tonight, I'm especially pleased to present to you our new Jacklyn Potter Young Poets Competition Director, Kathy Haley. Some of you will probably remember that last year when we presented our fabulous final program of the Joaquin Miller Poetry Series, a program you can still see on our YouTube channel, Kathy was one of our featured readers. Kathy is the author of I'd Rather Be a Hyacinth. She teaches in Johns Hopkins University's online MA in Teaching Writing programs. And she previously taught high school English and creative writing in Northern Virginia public schools. She is a great networker, and we are very lucky and pleased to have her working with us. Kathy, the stage is yours. You can introduce the poets as you see fit. We still, I think, are waiting for our third poet, so take the stage, Kathy.
Thank you for such a generous introduction, Karen. I appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank all of our early round judges and our final judge, Mac, who praised all the poets in this final group, saying they are all doing important work on urgent subject matter. And Mac is here tonight in the audience. I'll start by introducing our runner-up, Sion Kim. And if Richard comes in later, I'll follow Evan Wang with his reading. Sion Kim is a sophomore at the Wheeler School in Providence, Rhode Island. She's the 2021 Scripps Spelling Bee state champion and an avid Prussian history enthusiast. She has been published in the Just Poetry National Poetry Quarterly, won first place in the 2022 Bob Oberg Poetry Contest, and received silver and gold keys for poetry in the Scholastic Writing Awards. Mac was intrigued first by Sion's innovative forms, including a multi-itinerary chart-like poem that starts out the packet, then the combination of plain language and the fantastical. There is a mythology to these poems, yet there is also an elegy that feels very true to life and death. Sion is doing interesting things with narrative and form that remind Mac of conversations about fiction not being equal to not true. Still, one wonders where the lines are, and it's fun to wonder. Sion, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm going to read Suburban Birds. This was written with a lot of asides and parentheticals, so if there are bits where the phrasing sounds strange, that's what it is. Suburban Birds. Jay dreams of creation every night and chases the wild turkey that roamed the neighborhood lawns by day. I ask her what she's doing, and she asks me if I've ever seen where a turkey goes to sleep. She fashions herself to be some sort of Icarus, a gleam of incandescent brilliance, doomed to a tragic, passionate ending in the watery depths. She's a romantic and I am not, so I tell her that she sounds stupid and that she might as well be Theseus's father instead, the fool who threw himself into the sea in premature grief. Jay counters that he, Theseus's father, got a sea named after him, and I throw my hands up and tell her that she can go live with the turkeys for all I care. I have a math test tomorrow. The turkeys, wild, leave dark prints in the morning dew of the grass they meander dew in the mornings, as the neighborhood stirs from its sleep, fitful. Suburbia dreams its turkey dreams, and Jay wakes up early to shadow them, the wild turkey that walked through my neighborhood. She invites me once to follow the turkeys, and I say no. I have a math test tomorrow and I haven't studied yet. Miss Gonzalez doesn't give extra credit, and I wonder sometimes what she does when she stalks the turkeys. Plenty of them, or more, taking a left on Howell Street across the lawn of the house with the pink door. But I am not curious enough to wake up early, 6:30, an hour before the bus comes. The turkeys leave footprints all over my dreams. To accompany her, though I am sure Jay probably tells them all sorts of stories about me. They are wild and full of germs, so I watch them from the window as she trails them close behind. My mom is in a rush one morning when the turkeys are crossing the streets. Jay tells me they make this crossing 4 times every morning without fail. And when she sees a gap in the stream of feathers, ash gray and full of germs, don't pick up that feather they left behind. She hits the gas. We're not going to make it. The turkeys, head full of Jay's stories, are smart enough not to get hit, but not enough to understand we are only passing through, and they break into a panicked sprint alongside the car, turkey reflection on the blue Chevy doors, to outflank her, and when we finally crown from the sea of turkeys, I look back at them, and they stand devastatingly still, the road dividing the flock suddenly unsurmountable. I report to Jay that the turkeys in our neighborhood, they are locked in a tumultuous relationship, the neighborhood and the turkeys, are stupid, and it shouldn't matter where they sleep at night, fitful dreams. And Jay repeats her Icarus spiel, incandescent, brilliant, bright sun, and that she can't help it, she has to see where the turkey go, when the world is quiet, just once. That night, I sit at the window and think of Jay, incandescent, brilliant, bright, in the dark, and I imagine Icarus falling into a wine-dark sea. His back hits the surface like a concrete wall, and the ocean folds around him silently, broken bones and all, and envelops him in a deep and watery embrace, and it can love him the way the sun, incandescent, brilliant, bright, bright, cannot. The next morning, I wake up early and find Jay standing in a waist-high river of turkey. And I look at her and she looks at me and everything is incandescent, brilliant, bright, bright, bright. I'll read one more. It's titled Elaine Chen is Moving Back to the Moon. She calls me the night before she fails her driver's test for the third time. It is not quite an invitation, but I am at her door anyway. We find her father nodding off to the Australian Open in the den, and she begs him to drive us to the ice cream shop again one last time. We sit on the roof of his car in the beachside parking lot, where we have watched a million maritime flirtations of moon and sun and sea, and every dalliance in between, her father listening to the radio below us. Elaine announces that when she gets her license, she can drive us to the ice cream shop whenever we goddamn want, looking altogether very pleased with herself. And I do not remind her that I got my license last month, suddenly feeling very sorry for having come at all. The mood rumbles above and around us as Elaine's sticky fingers drag clumsily through my hair, and before I can suddenly tell her off, I am asking her if she thinks she'll finally get her license tomorrow, and she says yes. I ask her if she's at all nervous, and she says something like that, and my skin is still tacky where her hands have touched them when we climb back down. Her father drives us home, running every stop sign on the way, and 2 weeks later she is gone. I find ways to keep myself amused, close my eyes and picture myself back on the car roof the way I should have been, insistent and perhaps even angry. But even then, she only throws her head back to look up at the sky and answer, and I follow her gaze to the moon. She leans into me, and we shiver in the spring chill until the sun rises, because I am too afraid to ask any more of myself and futile questions. Tomorrow, she'll get into the car with her driving instructor and drive, split a path down the water to the kisses of sunlight that dance about the waves in the far-off horizon, up and away until I can see her no more, and maybe then I will finally know peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Sion. What a beautiful weaving of imagery, mythology, and narrative from your own life, or I'm making an assumption there, but thank you so much. Next, we have our winner, Evan Wang. Evan Wang is the first youth poet laureate of Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. His work has appeared in Counterclock Journal, Violet, Indigo, Blue, etc., Philadelphia Stories, National Poetry Quarterly, and elsewhere. He is an alumnus of the Iowa Young Writers Studio and an ANAFRA Fellow. His work has been featured at and recognized by the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers, Button Poetry, the Poetry Society of Virginia, Philadelphia Contemporary, and the Interlochen Arts Academy, the Moonstone Arts Center, and the Ruth Weiss Foundation. He is a sophomore at Upper Marion High School. M. Mack noted Evan's consistency, saying all 5 are stunning poems and the voice is just luscious. This packet had me by the throat from the title of the first poem through the ending of the last, they said. The poems never released me, even after I finished reading them. This young poet has a powerful, distinct voice that elegizes bits of culture and liminal spaces braided together. Evan's poems have a sense of control and careful language that makes their subject matter even more jarring. Horror is told to you lovely. Evan's poems are strong prayers. I would read a book of these, said Matt. Evan, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that wonderful introduction and that commentary. Wow, such high praise. That's a lot to live up to. Thank you so much for selecting me as the winner. It's such an honor to have this space for me and for showing up tonight. It was a real struggle to pick which poems I wanted to read, but I eventually did land on these poems, so I hope you guys will like them. The first poem I will read has the title in Mandarin. It's called 新传统, which means new tradition. New tradition. Let it be known, we circled, barefooted, the parking lot, searching for our car, last seen by villagers to be ferrying torsos across a river. No matter. The living do what they know best. From this foreign shore I call street, I hand body parts to you, for where? A father's shoulder, a mother's back, the things we do for survival. At home, everyone is missing a chest, taken by a bullet tracing itself through a new frontier, and I name it immigrant. There, you wear your country's skin well. When the sun gives, you could hang it alongside my wedding dress, but I am a boy, and you looked into my face, bruised with makeup, to remind me, so you don't. Though I am your son, it's too easy to forget how I ran from love, how the Chinese night eats its simple men, how these streets swallow cars whole. One thing is easy to keep. Your old language I use for poems and pillow talk, here's one. The jade talismans you brought over from the village have made like a wishbone and split itself home, follow it, but you can't. Your tires are slashed, you run, but everywhere is made of streets and everything is slashed, come back. We are in the parking lot again, holding your son, stroking his cheek, finding in his mouth the second half of everything you've ever wanted. Thank you. The next poem, wow, this is a sonnet, and if you can't tell, I added M dashes in there, so it's very Emily Dickinson. And I wrote this while I was at the Iowa Young Writers Workshop, and for the longest time, this has been regarded as my opus, and honestly, I don't know. So this is dog years, and there are Mandarin words in here as well, so I'm gonna quickly translate them. I have yao wo, which means bite me, and liu wo, which means keep me, and also it means leave me, so there's a dichotomy. Dog years. The sheer veil of this hour hides my bare teeth and lips licked raw. Behind the eye sit stars, undeclared like the dirt-filled hole beneath where your friends are buried. So look here, your attention is mine. Don't forget to dog ear my leg and give me my bone. Love you, human. Keep calling me good boy. Let's walk until you yawn, my mouth open, for new treats to explore, the accents of the tongue. Yao wo, liu wo, who do I think I am? My ancestors' feral hunger or rogue, like by your feet lies the perfect love poem. Dog tired, on seeing meat, the lone hound fucks, but on seeing flesh, my two legs curl up. Thank you. All right, next poem. This is a funny story about this one. This was rejected like 12 times before it finally got accepted by Rhino, which is like a big literary magazine. So I was like, oh my gosh. So this is like really the underdog. Breaking news. Ghost of Michelle Go haunts the after images. Last night, the neighbor stumbled back with red wedding wax on his face, and sister crawled out of the train tracks into the beaks of eagles. Talk about revival. She doesn't want to. Hound milk skin with the head on fire, or has she not been made aware of the possibility? It's raining cats and dogs. It's a feast. The old man beaten to a fetal position, the protest down the street. Times bleed red and red again like nails, every good Asian's gun. Talk about a rude awakening. She doesn't want to re-enter the living hell in a handbasket, but she's returning home now, tuned to the chatter of a policeman's radio, the livelong song, tuned to the rattling of bones when the freight train cuts down the street or the lack thereof, tuned to the pulses of marching bodies chanting a name. Who is she? Who has gone? In this yellowing night, even the Upper West Side churns out an apology. But like every good ghost, she swallows it and chews it into a scene of closed shop doors marked with caplet graffiti. She's going back to where she belonged, is she not? She's being good, but why is her face on the news? Why are the ghosts brought in for interviews? She's trying to get home. Without the subway, without corpses on the sidewalk, without seeing the pushes and shoves and fires and bent knives and broken canes, even in the dark, there are not enough lifetimes for mercy. She is tripping her way down the street as an augury full of contradictions, while dragging her feet, future scar bodies, Calabasas heavy, unskin themselves around her dinner table, waiting for her to come home. Thank you. All right, this next one is called Psalm for Plastic Jesus, and this was the first one in the packet, so I think that was the one with the cool title. And I really did think I kind of did good on this title. This is going to be made into a dance really soon, so that's cool. Psalm for Plastic Jesus. The strongest prayers are made of bodies moaned open like a wound. Even now, like old earth, cathedral ribs are broken by constant warring. Sunburned fields torn by bullets strip soldiers down to white flags so the doves are in flight. Say my sanctuaries are pregnant with bombs carried in by families, and bullets air out on prayers gasped open by hands. High above is a God we both surrender to, and mine is full of stars. I admit, I am guilty. I barely believed until I needed to. The last time, I believed until I smelled smoke, and plastic was made alive. And you, before this blood, you were killing it in salvation, mistaking thorns for crowns, poppies to be roses. There were hymns in the dirt when you wanted to look for them. Untouched gunmetal and faith in the bodies dropped by planes. Say it never hurt anyone. Say I am not dipped in blood and fire shaped. This is truth. Lives and burnings for a thumbprint's worth of ash, chin up, palms together. The pews were on fire, and you wanted the water to be holy. Thank you. Last poem. This one is called Night Elegy for Us. The man in my room stokes electricity with his shipwrecked body, brings a chair in a location on his charred tongue. This is not his first night here. Years ago, I distinguished my body as night, and he has lurked ever since. Standing between my open closet and unbroken bed, electricity arced down his body to revive the damages of his one perfectly fitted life. He is love from a loveless world and unknown names I dare not keep. In his full stomach is a life I escaped from or never entered. Every step he takes splinters the floorboard. I attempt to wave him away, but the dark swallows my hands. With my family sleeping unknowingly in the bliss next door, he seems a heavy cross or guillotine dragging himself to me. I am looking future in the eye, and it can look so violently until it is already behind the boy he drags out of one painful dream into another, where my ankles are in his hands, where he is pulling me towards his lonesome chair sitting in front of the closet he crawled out of, punched open like a coffin, and it feels too real. The moon is half out, and he shoves his tongue location halfway down my throat before pulling away after tasting luck in the flesh of my tender mouth. I tell him I love him, and he winces, then lets go. My cheeks shy with his blood print, glassy like eyes in between shocks. It doesn't come off easily. It sizzles, and I know this song, this crackle of a beat. I too hum this electricity behind a man's back. Thank you.
Wow,
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Just going to say thank you for bringing your unique voices, both of you, and making them come alive for us through your readings. It was wonderful.
You're both so accomplished. It was thrilling to hear you read, really. Thank you both for those complex, moving poems. We're now going to move on to our featured reader for the evening, our featured poet, Claire McGoff. Claire and I met at the Writers' Center in the early 2000s in a class taught by Rose Solari, and have been fast friends and poetry chums ever since. Claire's debut poetry collection, From These Outskirts, was published in 2022 by Finishing Line Press. Her work has also appeared in Image Magazine, Innisfree Poetry Journal, Beyond Words Literary Magazine, and included in Snowdrops, an anthology published by Wingless Dreamer. Claire has an MFA from Warren Wilson. Reviewer Betty Adcock writes that From These Outskirts takes us into shadow realms and fiercely lit landscapes. At the beginning of Claire's book, she quotes Muriel Rukeyser, a quote that Claire tells me she finds particularly inspiring. The universe of poetry is the universe of emotional truth. Our material is the way we feel and the way we remember. The poems in Claire's book deeply embody that quote, delivering in grainy detail and musical language her memories of the small Texas and Colorado towns where she grew up. In her poem, Cities of the Sun, August, she takes us to her father's remote mountain compound where he lived after her parents' divorce. The compound consisted of 3 hand-built domes, the first with an east-facing stained glass window. We humans were meant to wake, her father tells her, and Claire wakes us to the harsh beauties and terrors of the world she grew up in. I am very pleased to introduce my dear friend, Claire McGoff.
So Ellen, thank you so much for that very thoughtful introduction. If we were in the same room, I would give you a big hug. So generous. Also, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be reading in this wonderful series the Café Muse runs. It's so wonderful to have this opportunity to share our work as poets with others. It's also been a real privilege tonight to be with the Jacklyn Potter Young Poets. Sayang, I believe, and Evan, hope I pronounced that right. I just really enjoyed hearing your work, so thank you. I'm going to read mostly from my book, From These Outskirts, that Ellen spoke a little bit about. And 2 of the poems I'm going to read are not in the book. And I'm actually going to start with one of those. But before I do, I wanted to say that a little bit about this. War was a band that we listened to in the 70s, a band that was punk rock, soul, a little reggae, samba, and songs like Lowrider, Cisco Kid, Why Can't We Be Friends? And our options for listening to music, of course, were very limited, as some of you experienced as well, compared to today. We had our albums, our 45s. Where I lived in the small town, we had one rock and roll station on the radio. The rest was country western. And we had our 8-track tapes. And some were lucky enough to have 8-track tape players rigged in their cars and their pickups. War was an 8-track band that could carry us to Tulsa and back in 2 days. Mostly it was Maine that measured our boredom, our beat, by the number of times we'd drag its 4-block strip. We'd circle the football field, city park, its big tree and the muddy creek, and head back to the Conoco parking lot. Some nights we'd stop in Bobby's body shop to visit boys home from Vietnam. Others too young for the draft, and some who would never leave. Michael and Ricky never came home. The air those nights was charged with the smell of paint, Jack Daniels, and Love Your Peaches on KLMN radio out of Oklahoma City. What I wanted then was some out-of-town Cisco kid to skid onto Maine and take me a fast ride down Highway 15, low rider with the bass pulsing from his silver Trans Am. What I want now is to swim just one more time in those muddy creeks that hemmed us in, those veins that still reach out to me like some mighty Rio Grande. This next poem is titled Coal Creek Canyon. Coal Creek Canyon is an area in Colorado about 45 minutes northwest of Denver. And I think the highest ridge there is about 9,000 feet. Coal Creek Canyon, and there's epigraph. The cottonwood leaf in fall turns back to the color of aspen. The boulders huddled here and there, as if a giant hand had nestled them where it wanted. I'd scramble over the mossy shoulders and run the needled ground back to the road lined with aspen, their leaves flickering like sun on a mountain creek. Each autumn, the leaves dangled like gold coins without the weight, like my father's kiss on my cheek. The white-gray bark was scratched in haphazard scars. The marks, my father said, show the age of the slender trees. My father built our A-frame so high up you can see the Continental Divide. I'd stand on my tiptoes on the highest rock, and still I couldn't see. Suppers were quiet, too far, my mother said. On a winter morning, we left, mother, sister, and me, the switchbacks taking us down past the ponderosa pines that thin into junipers, into bare city trees. By late afternoon, just us and the color of straw spread out both sides of the road. The new creek is brown, stagnant except for when it rains. Cottonwoods lining the bank bend in one direction from the wind. As determined to stay, it seems, as my mother was before we finally left. One tree is uprooted and has fallen across the creek. I sit on its coarse bark, dangling my feet over water that never does run clear. So in 1959, the U.S. Mint changed the reverse design on the 1 cent, on the Lincoln cent, from the wheat design to the new memorial. So in 1958, the reverse side of the penny was the wheat, and in 1959, it was the memorial. This poem is called 1959, D Mule Penny. On the obverse side, the head of Lincoln. On the reverse, the obsolete wheat design instead of the new memorial. The experts call this mix the mule penny, different back and front than it should be, a mismatch, error, or better, mischief of the coin artist. The penny passes through 27 years of unknowing fingers before a collector discovers it. And even with its authenticity in question, the hybrid cent sells for $48,000 at an auction in 2003. Take the mule itself, mix of mare and donkey, more valuable than the chariot horse, favored by the kings of Israel, known in Egypt before the time of Moses. Not only do they eat less than horses and are hardier, as George Washington discovered, but they live longer, so he bred them. They multiplied, and by the time Lincoln came along, the states had thousands. Not so with a rare mule coin. In 1959, a gallon of gas is 20 cents. The US children hear names like Vietnam. Alaska is newly admitted as the 49th state. My sister is 2. My parents are unhappy together. My grandmother reunites with her alcoholic husband in Fairbanks, Alaska, city of the Northern Lights. All her life, my mother is repulsed by the smell of whiskey. As a teen, she joins a strict church, learns it's wrong to wear lipstick and jewelry, feels she's dangling over the pit of hell for wanting. Maybe that's one reason my agnostic father, minimalist that he is, falls in love with her. In 1963, my grandfather moves from the Northern Lights to Texas to his early but sober death. Mother tells the kind version of his life. Smart chemist, walked on his hands, always had a joke. She says a person shouldn't expose a man's nakedness, which is biblical, but I go back and forth, heads or tails, things hidden in plain sight. So my father lived most of his life in Colorado and New Mexico. The last 5 years he lived up here in Maryland. And the last few days of his life, he was in hospice. White sand. They wheeled my father back to wash him, all the layers with their trained hands. They scrubbed off the elderly years of sponge baths and all those middle years of the occasional black bucket shower. They scrubbed away the once-a-week bath of his boyhood until he emerged with skin of a newborn from the bath of his mother's womb. They patted him dry. They swaddled him in sheets, Eden's sheets, yet unsoiled. His body as weightless as before all of the rest of his days began. The dutiful hands had scrubbed until the New Mexico sun disappeared like topsoil in wind. They'd rubbed, turned, and wrapped his skeleton body in sheets of white sand, all but his head they'd covered. This poem, this next poem has an epigraph from a poem by Linda Pastan, one of her earlier poems called Meditation by the Stove. And the epigraph is, "It was never simple, even for birds, this business of nests." And one second. The name of the poem is Prayer in the Bedroom Doorway. Close your eyes and rest now. You have dressed them to go out into the snow, coerced arms through sleeves, forced feet into boots. How you lifted them and lifted them, fed, bathed, woke them, took them to lessons and buttered toast in your sleep. You felt you'd be changing diapers forever. It wasn't so fleeting at that time. So much is hidden now, like the pony stencils beneath 2 layers of paint and the obvious absence embodied in a well-made bed. Do not lament unremembered details. You mustn't overthink trains with faces, princess quilts, and each thread you gave away or turned into rags. May the hour be blessed now, like then. Bedtime and waking be blessed, and dawn's calm lie on the face of every sleeping child, fortunate enough or not to hear Winnie the Pooh or Goodnight Moon. Be grateful for the second-hand piano and for hearing the youngest say she couldn't sleep without an older practicing down the hall. Be grateful for duets and for the circle of fifths. In this threshold of this milky light, close your eyes and listen. In the still, strange quiet, be grateful for fur, scales, and wings. Go now, fling open the back door. Let the old dog charge out into the yard with her ferocious bark. Okay, I thought this poem would this poem would segue into that one, or that one would, I guess, segue into this one. This is called Matriarch. The cloud is an elephant, my mother says, as we fly 4 hours from her home to mine. I look out to see a trunk siphoning water, the outline of an ear, and one small eye gazing past another cloud. The rest dissipates. We once watched elephants in East Africa. We learned how they nuzzle the bones of their dead, feel the dried skulls with the soles of their feet, pass their mourning and their memory on to the next generations. I study my mother's face as she rests now and close my eyes as well. Against my own dark lids, I see the matriarch. I hear the trumpet as she celebrates birth. Elephant families gather at the river to drink, and they play, even the old, when they feel safe. This next poem is another one that's not in the collection. So let's see. Oh, it's an ekphrastic poem, just as a reminder for anyone who might not know what that means. It's a poem that is made or written by thinking about another piece. It addresses another work of art. So this is a Maasai warrior and his 1,000-mile sandals. Visible strokes blend the bronze and gold of dusk. He's just a boy, standing in the foreground, holding the spear as still as an acacia tree seen from a distance. The spear crosses the young man's shoulders, the slender of his neck, and spans the canvas. He's robed in red from mid-chest to his ankles, and he looks out as if to find his mother's manyata. A white Kenyan artist has painted this warrior, all but his feet. A story now, this fixture flush against the fern green wall of my living room, above the marble fireplace that burns all winter long. I'd like to think that the boy's feet, in his rubber tire sandals, are there, just tucked into the bottom of the thick gilded frame, that his feet are there and going to wriggle free, to return him to his family, their spotted cattle, their bleating goats. Okay, let's see. I think I have time for 2 short ones here. Here we go. This is called The Trestle East of Derzet. And Derzet is the small town I've referred to, I think, in a couple of the poems that I've read, where I grew up from the time I was 10 to when I went to college. My sister would lead. Every few ties, she'd wait, would look back, hurry, hurry. Neither knew the train's schedule, had no plan. What, would we run, hang from a tie till the force of the rumble shook our fingers loose? The question of balance and the odds of a train, equally scary. Now the trestle's gone, struck by lightning while we slept. I stand among its fallen parts, charred bits half buried in dust, and squint up at the severed rail splayed like rigor mortis against the sky. The low whistle of wind, condolences. And I have one more poem, and thank you so much. This is called Ode to a Tractor. Oh, sorry, old green, you haven't turned the soil in decades. Put out to pasture, you sit at the south end of a retired section near the old Sunset Schoolhouse, your hood pointing east. Nestled in prairie weeds, fire wheels, and primrose, your parts were the cycles of weather, of the morning dew, afternoon heat, and the stars that rise and cross the sky. Field mice that once scurried from your pickers now shelter in the walls of your dry rotted tires. I drove you in my 15th summer, green as a grasshopper, no cab, no umbrella, just a new radio with one decent station. Thank you.
Claire, thank you for the beautiful poems. It's so moving. Now, Karen Alanier will conduct a question and answer period with our poets.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you to each of our poet readers this evening. One thing that I noticed acutely, I think, was that each of these poets had a great sense of timing in their approach to writing. I would like each of you to tell us a little bit about your process and what is important to you when you write a poem. And it might be helpful to pick one of the poems that you presented here tonight to talk about this. But I think that, your sense of pacing was really terrific, and it contributed to a very nice musical sense. So let's start with Claire and see what she has to say, and then we'll go to Evan and then Sion.
Okay, wow, this is a great question. So the process, the pacing, I've been writing for a lot longer, of course, than our young poets. And so I think that some of the poems that I have, for the second one I read, I think was Cold Creek Canyon, that's gone through many revisions. And I'm an adult speaker looking way back. And I think that for me, the distance between now or adulthood and childhood had something to do with the process of writing the poem. I'm trying to think of what else. For me, I'm a big revisionist. I love to revise, and I think that because I'm writing free verse for the most part, not a lot of form. I really like to think about sound. It's fun for me, so I hope that can come across, I guess, and I hope that process comes across in the final version that I read. So I hope that answered.
Yes, I think, whatever your process is what we wanted to know about. And I think that, how you create your musicality is, below the surface. So you might not have a real tap into how you do that exactly. Thank you. Evan, what can you say about your process and what's important to you when you're writing?
There's this quote that Ocean Vuong said about writing, and that's to always start with honesty and end with art. And I sort of always follow that with my poems. I think for poems for you to really like a poem, it has to fully represent what you're trying to say, especially with something like poetry. I know that when I write, sometimes I get so involved within the techniques, the metaphors, the intermeaning, how everything should be cohesive. that I lose sight of what I'm trying to say in the beginning when everything becomes so obscure. And so I guess a huge part of my revision is to make sure that what I'm trying to express is coming through clearly. And if it's not, then I wouldn't like the poem as much and I would probably ditch the project. But so usually I radically revise, like Claire, I do a lot of revising as well. I usually write a first draft and then I would read it over the next day with brand new eyes, because by that time I don't remember what I wrote. So you're reading it as like a reader would. And so you can find out all the ineptitudes and the bad things about that and then change it. So it's quite impossible for me to write a short poem because I'm always adding more and adding more. But that's sort of my process, to always be honest.
I all of my poems I write tend to be free verse. The first free verse sort of I did was the first poem I really wrote was in free verse, and it just opened up poetry for me because I hadn't really known about that was thing, and it felt so much poetry felt so much more restrictive before, but free verse allowed me to explore more and come to really love poetry. And with Suburban Birds, the first poem I read, I want to follow the rhythm of a young person stream of consciousness and how they're constantly doubling back and or reaffirming things for themselves to feel better about themselves. So yeah, I tend to agonize over poems for a while and just have everything in a sort of sandbox document, and then I'll write everything in one go, one sitting. So that's
very good. That's interesting, and those are the kinds of details that we love to hear, when we're asking this kind of question. I also want to ask each of you to name poets that influence your work, and I think that will be the conclusion of our question and answer period. But I think that would be interesting to know. So let's start again with Claire and Evan, and then Seong.
I would say Elizabeth Bishop, for sure. There's a James Richardson and Betty Adcock, our own David Keplinger, Morris Manning. There's so many that have really influenced my work. Did I just take just gems and bits and pieces from and learn and try to apply it to my work in some way, or just enjoy it, even though, you can really, I think, get a lot out of another writer's work that is just such a different work than your own, and you're a different voice, but still learn from it. So those are just a few.
I would say I was really heavily influenced by Ocean Vuong when I first started writing, yeah. And then I loved Ada Limon. She's absolutely incredible. I loved how she approached poetry with such a surface level way, but also when you dive deeper, there's a whole world to be explored. Topaz Winters, Jenny Xie, I'm sure there's like a bunch of other poets that I can't think of right off the top of my head. Richard Seiken, wow, I love Richard Seiken, amazing. But yeah, those poets, just like Claire as well, I take bits and pieces. I would read some of the poems and I get so influenced by them that I would write a whole poem based off of one line. And that's how these poems sort of come to be. I would be in the middle of one and I would think, you know what, this reminds me of this poem. And so I would go back and read that poem, and then that sort of helps me write this new poem. And that's typically how it goes.
I also love Richard Seiken. Just all of his poems were a huge inspiration to me, and also Ocean Vuong, especially when I was starting out. I really like D.A. Powell. My favorite poem, "Talk to the Undertaker," was written by him, and also Angie Seijun Lo. She her poem Jessica Gives Me a Chill Pill is sort of really sparked my first interest in writing. And there's this one phrase I remember very clearly that especially just interested me. That was, Jessica has a forehead scar from the deep end of the pool. I asked Jessica what drowning feels like, and she says not everything feels like something else. I think that really electrified me and led me to first start writing poetry.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, poets. I really appreciate your answers, and I think we'll all go home and, start thinking about these other poets that influence us. But in the meantime, we hope to see more of your work, and that people will be able to reach Claire's bookseller and buy her book. And I'm very thankful for a wonderful program. Thank you, Kathy Haley, and thank you, Ellen. And I'm turning it back to Ellen to close the program.
Thank you, Karen. And also I want to especially thank you for doing these Q&As. You always have such interesting questions, and it's great to gain insight into the inner workings of our poets' minds and how they produce this wonderful work. So thank you. Claire, thanks again for that beautiful reading. And Evan and Seon, you're amazing. I loved hearing your work, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with your poetry careers as time goes on. I expect great things. Michael, your music, as always, is lovely and puts us in just the right mood for poetry. So thank you. And Karen, I'm going to thank you once again for leading our brave band of Café Musers. I also want to thank Henry for his technical magic, and my fellow co-hosts, Renee Garrity, Henry Crawford, Majda Gama, Claire McGoff, and Luther Jett, who have all contributed so much to making this program possible. Most importantly, I want to thank all of you, our audience. Café Muse couldn't exist without you, so thank you for being here. If you want to enjoy tonight's program again, it should be up on the Café Muse YouTube channel tomorrow. And you can extend your enjoyment by purchasing Claire's book. The link is in the chat, and telling others about the series. I hope you'll join us for our next Café Muse program on Monday, July 11, featuring Luther Jett and Indram Anirthanayagam. Good night, everyone. Thank you all for allowing us to be part of your evening.